Perhaps the UFO issue is too overwhelming. Leaked UFO data is not conveniently placed in one single location. There is far too much information and sources that have pieces of the puzzle. However, having it all is not necessary. We simply need to understand that there is a cover-up, and that this knowledge is being kept from us. That in itself is a reason to fear the issue. Whenever you sequester knowledge away, whoever controls that knowledge is under constant temptation to use it against the populace or for their own agenda. The fact that any extraterrestrial race can enter our atmosphere with impunity invites danger. We would never allow a foreign country to invade our airspace or take our citizens. So why are our governments allowing aliens to abduct us, fly over our cities, and conduct experiments on the people of our nations? Is it because they can do nothing about it? Or is it because they are aware of the extraterrestrials and even allied with them? Either scenario is frightening. All of the information gathered to date suggests that world governments are well aware of the ET presence, and that they have been aware for decades. You may ask yourself, why should I be concerned? Only you can answer that question. However, consider this. If the extraterrestrials are here for some nefarious plan, wouldn't you want to know? Or if they are simply here to observe us, are you comfortable being a lab rat? And if the government truly is working with aliens, then your tax dollars are supporting this effort, be it for the betterment of mankind or its demise. At the very least, you should be informed of anything that affects you personally. At midnight on September 19th of 1976, the Iranian Air Force began receiving calls about a mysterious light shining above the streets of Tehran. Fearing an enemy aircraft, generals separately dispatched 2 pilots to investigate. What happened next would go down in UFO history. As the first pilot approached the object, his aircraft systems completely failed. Aborting his mission, he turned back towards the city, only to have his plane return to full operational capacity. The second pilot suffered an even creepier fate. After picking the object up on radar, he prepared to shoot it down, only for the object to attack him instead. Allegedly, a bright light launched itself at his craft, missing only when he executed an evasive maneuver. What followed was a chase across Tehran's skies as the object knocked out communication systems, shorted out power supplies, and generally caused mayhem on the ground before it finally disappeared. Although no conclusive proof exists, today nearly all those involved apparently believe they encountered a genuine UFO. However, we'll never know if the Iranian government itself agreed. All records were destroyed or lost following the Islamic Revolution a mere 3 years later. Antonio Villas-Boas' UFO experience was one of the first reported examples of alien abduction. Antonio was a Brazilian farmer working in a field late at night on October 16th of 1957 to avoid the scorching heat of working during the day. He claimed that as he plowed a field, he spotted a red star in the sky. This light slowly moved closer until he discerned that it was in fact a circular or egg-shaped UFO with a red light on its front. The craft landed in the field Antonio was working in. The farmer tried to make a run for it, but was captured and taken inside the UFO by a tall humanoid wearing gray coveralls and a helmet. He was taken into a room, had his clothes removed, and then he was joined by a very attractive female with white hair but bright red pubic hair. Despite his capture and his strange environment, he felt strongly for the female humanoid as she was naked, and Antonio was instantly attracted to her. Without speaking or kissing, they had sex, during which she growled like a dog. After the acts were over, the woman made gestures that Antonio took to mean that the act of sex was for the expressed desire to create a child. He was then given his clothes back and escorted off the craft. Antonio became a successful lawyer and always told the same account. A very credible UFO encounter occurred in the small town of Delphos, Kansas in 1971. This case has never been debunked and is still considered as one of the very best physical trace cases involving a UFO landing. 16-year-old Ron Johnson, along with his dog Snowball, was tending the family sheep when his attention was suddenly drawn to a mushroom-shaped UFO appearing in the night sky. The flying object, metallic with multicolored lights, was hovering approximately 75 feet away from Ron among some trees. Johnson estimated the craft was only a few feet above the ground. He estimated the craft's diameter at 6 to 8 feet. Ron described the craft as making a loud sound, like an old washing machine which vibrates. The glow of the object's bottom increased as it began to rise into the sky. He ran back to the family house to alert his mother and father. The bright glowing object was now even higher in the sky. Ron's parents came running around the side of the house to get a glimpse of the unusual phenomenon. They arrived just in time to see the object, now big as the full moon, as it disappeared from view. The three Johnsons were shocked to see a glowing ring on the ground, right below where the craft had hovered. There was also a glowing material on some of the trees nearby. After touching the ring, Ron's mother's fingers went numb, like she had been given a local anesthesia. After they were sure the craft was not returning, the family settled down for the night. The glowing circle remained overnight. Investigators took soil samples and determined the soil was severely dehydrated and would not hold water. Nothing would grow in the affected area as well. The unusual landing ring remained for several months after the encounter. In 1975, Travis Walton was abducted in full view of 5 forestry workers. He was missing for 5 days and presumed dead. On the 5th day, he was returned, brandishing a full 5 days beard growth. The witnesses, as well as Travis, took and passed lie detector tests. Travis described the interior of the craft as well as the beings who abducted him in detail. If he was not abducted, where was he for 5 days while his co-workers were being accused of his murder? Abductees have shown that they display all the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Nothing can cause this except a real, experienced event. At 7 a.m. on the 30th of June in 1908, near the lower Tunguska River in Siberia, a large explosion occurred. The explosion was so massive that it caused damage 400 miles away and was heard even further. For several nights all over northern Europe, the sky glowed enough to light the streets of London. At first, it was assumed that a massive meteorite had collided with the Earth. However, after the Second World War and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, photos of the cities were compared with aerial photos of the Tunguska blast, and they were stunningly similar. As a result of this, various scientists speculated that a nuclear explosion had taken place over the area, and because no nation possessed a nuclear device at that time, the logical conclusion was that it was from an exploded alien nuclear-powered craft. If you think crop circles are bizarre, what would you think of people who claim to have had sex with aliens? Actually, it's not an uncommon report within the annals of UFO research. In what is probably China's best-known alien abduction report, farmer Ming Zhagao claims that in 2010 he was visited by a 9-foot-tall humanoid alien with 12 fingers and braided leg hair. He claims he went up into the hills to investigate what looked like a fallen aircraft when he was approached by the alien being. Ming and the alien had sex for 40 minutes while levitating in the air. The being returned that night to tell Ming she would bear his hybrid baby in 60 years. Police say Ming passed a lie detector test. In his book, Hair of the Alien, Peter Corey claims to have had 2 alien abduction experiences. The primary encounter involved 2 naked Nordic-like aliens who telepathically and sexually assaulted Peter. He went public with physical evidence of the encounter, claiming to have a blonde hair strand from one of the aliens. What followed was the world's first DNA analysis of a biological sample from an alleged alien abduction experience. As would be expected, the results of this DNA analysis have been hotly debated. Psychic Stephanie Fake Cohen claims to have had out-of-this-world sex with octopus-looking aliens and cat people. Interestingly, or perhaps disturbingly is the right word, of this cat imagery appears in her abduction experience. Another of the most bizarre supposed UFO sightings in modern history took place at Falcon Lake in Manitoba, Canada, and involved a man named Stephen Malkalik. Malkalik was a prospector who claims to have encountered not one, but two UFOs, and after investigating the objects, he was blasted with some sort of hot gas from an exhaust vent that left him with bizarre markings on his midsection and led to his being hospitalized. This remains one of the most bizarre cases of a UFO sighting on record, simply because it's one of the few in which the person who claims to have made contact with alien life suffered a very real, very strange injury. He suffered from nausea, headaches, and the odd burn markings in a very distinct grid shape across his abdomen. There is no reasonable explanation for this, unless he too came into contact with the strange propulsion systems of one of their craft. If the United States government somehow was inexplicably unaware of the existence of extraterrestrial life up to the 1950s, then on July 29, 1952, they would be forced to concede the issue when a squadron of UFOs overflew the Capitol. The Washington National Airport sightings were not just a single night of UFO flyovers. From July 12th to July 29th, the Capitol was buzzing with UFO activity on a nightly basis. On July 19 at 11:40 p.m., Air Traffic Controller Edward Nugent spotted several craft 15 miles southwest of the Capitol. There were no scheduled aircraft in the area, and these craft were not flying any established flight paths. He wrote in his report that their movements were completely radical compared to those of ordinary aircraft. Other controllers in the area confirmed the radar blips and observed the orange ball-type UFOs outside their windows. More objects appeared on their radar scopes and moved over the White House and the Capitol building. The story made front-page headlines and alarmed the Truman administration. The president himself personally called Captain Edward J. Rupert, the supervisor of the Air Force's Project Blue Book investigation into the UFO mystery, and asked for an explanation of the sightings. The president was told it was a temperature inversion. However, the Air Force placed several jet pilots on nationwide alert with orders to shoot down any UFO that ignores orders to land. To this day, there is no explanation for this incident. The government accepted the weather-related explanation because it was easy to tell this to the public, rather than admit they knew the craft were alien in origin. A UFO sighting on the evening of December 29, 1980 changed the lives of 3 Texans forever, and not for the good. While driving through the southern tip of the East Texas piney woods north of Houston, Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Vicki's 7-year-old grandson Colby came upon a huge diamond-shaped object just above the trees and 130 feet away. Cash hit the brakes, and she and the elder Landrum stepped outside. Immediately, they noticed intense heat. Their faces felt as if they were burning. When Vicki re-entered the car and touched the dashboard to steady herself, she left a handprint. Blasting fire and heat, the UFO slowly ascended. Suddenly, numerous helicopters, 23 in all, appeared from all directions, positioning themselves near the strange craft. But this time, the witnesses were back in the car and watching the spectacle from their moving vehicle. Other motorists saw the object and the helicopters from different, more distant locations. Eventually, the flying objects were lost to view. Unfortunately, the episode was only beginning. Back home, the three fell sick, Cash most severely. She suffered blisters, nausea, headaches, diarrhea, loss of hair, and reddening of the eyes. On January 3rd, unable to walk and nearly unconscious, she was admitted to a Houston hospital. Vicky and Colby were experiencing the same symptoms, though less severely. The witnesses' health problems continued throughout their lives. In September 1991, Cash's personal physician, Dr. Brian McClelland, told the Houston Post that her condition was a textbook case of radiation poisoning, comparable to being 3 to 5 miles from the epicenter of Hiroshima. For years, the three have pursued their case through the courts, seeking answers and redress. But official agencies deny any knowledge of the incident, even though the helicopters have been identified as twin-rotor Boeing CH-47 Chinooks, used by both the Army and the Marines. Betty Cash died at the age of 71 on December 29, 1998, exactly 18 years after her claimed close encounter. Vicki Landrum died September 12th of 2007, 7 days before her 84th birthday. Are these bizarre alien accidents where humans were adversely subjected to their technology and suffered horrendous fates? Or could the extraterrestrials be uncaring and unsympathetic towards their encounters with hapless Earthlings? One thing is for sure, if you do happen upon a hovering UFO, stay away as far as you can. Saucers zipping about is not too unusual, but what makes them fly is a total mystery. Some have speculated they use a type of nuclear propulsion. If so, then this case from 1886 is very intriguing. In October 1886, a family in the Venezuelan town of Maracaibo suffered a strange and hideous fate. During an intense lightning storm, their small hut suddenly became bathed in a dazzling white light. The air outside was reportedly humming, and the inside of the hut filled with a smoky smell. Almost immediately, all 9 family members were overcome by a fit of vomiting, as large lesions erupted on their skin. But the worst was yet to come. After 9 days had passed and the encounter already begun to grow dim in their minds, the family suddenly began to lose their hair. Whole sections of their skin sloughed off, and all 9 became covered in hideous sores. At the same time, the trees around their hut withered and died. The family were taken to a hospital where no more is known of their fate. However, we can hazard a guess. They almost certainly died. The symptoms above are more or less identical to those caused by a massive blast of radiation, described almost 50 years before anyone knew what radiation poisoning was. What caused the death of that Venezuelan family remains unknown, but some flying saucer enthusiasts have claimed that radiation from a spacecraft is the only plausible answer. Whatever the truth, There's no denying that this story is the very definition of an unexplained phenomenon. It's one thing when one or two people observe a UFO, but when hundreds, even thousands of people witness UFOs, it's hard to ignore. Multiple mass UFO sightings throughout history have given pause to more than a few skeptics. They occur more frequently than you might imagine. On November 2nd in 1957, a fiery object was seen over Texas. At about 11 p.m. that evening in the town of Levelland, Texas, police received 15 frantic phone calls from local residents about a mysterious object in the sky. In an Associated Press account, one of the witnesses, a 30-year-old farm worker and Korean War veteran, described the object as a flash of light flying overhead with a rush of wind, and said that it had apparently caused the lights and engine of his truck to go dead. Other witnesses described the craft as blue and green and egg-shaped, and said that it abruptly morphed into a fireball before rising straight up and disappearing. During World War II, American pilots often reported seeing Foo Fighters, strange glowing orbs that circled and chased their fighter planes. Governments around the world would begin detailed records of these encounters, as some believed they belonged to other enemy countries. The Great Los Angeles Air Raid occurred on February 24, 1942, when a UFO strayed too close to the coastline. It was less than 3 months after the United States entered World War II as a result of the Japanese Imperial Navy's attack on Pearl Harbor, and one day after the bombardment of Elwood on the 23rd. Something flew over the coastline, causing the military to go on alert. Air raid sirens sounded throughout Los Angeles County on that night. A total blackout was ordered, and thousands of air raid wardens were summoned to their positions. At 3:16 a.m., the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade began firing 12.8-pound anti-aircraft shells into the air at the reported object. Over 1,400 shells would eventually be fired. Pilots of the 4th Interceptor Command were alerted but never ordered to fly. The artillery fire continued sporadically until 4:14 a.m. To this day, no one knows for sure what they were shooting at. Images taken on that night clearly show a saucer-shaped object hovering within the intense beams of the military spotlights.